Welcome back with another one of those new old records videos where I talk about my recent new old records. Let's start with the first one, Thank You Baby by the Stylistics. I really like those kind of mid-70s American vocal groups that were like a transition between R&B, soul music and what would become disco. This is still has lots of resemblance to what, for example, Motown Records would do in the late 60s, early 70s, but it already more than hints into the disco explosion of the late 70s. Another group in that style would be the Delphonics, probably my favorite of those kind of groups. But this is also very enjoyable. This is like a Sunday morning, sunny Sunday morning record. Very music that's very comforting and very warm sounding and keeps you in a chilled mood, I would say. And the exact opposite of a chilled mood is the legendary debut album by Suicide, I think from '77 probably. I talked about Suicide in one of my recent collaborations with Murdoch from Murdoch's Music Minute, where we talked about blind spots in our record collections, bands where we don't have any albums and we don't know many songs or maybe any songs of those groups, but where we are aware those are important groups and we should get into them and we probably would like them. And my number one pick was Suicide, a band where I always thought, by reading about them, that I would enjoy them and I can see the importance of the group, but I never got around to purchasing one of their records, and this is of course the most famous and most influential record. Very influential album, their debut album, and I didn't like it. I really thought I would enjoy it more, but it's too dark for me. It's too, I knew what I knew what I had to expect in a way because of all the things you read about this group and the bands that are influenced by them. But it was even darker than I hoped it would be, and I was more in a Stylistics mood in recent weeks than in a Suicide mood. Now I can also understand that the name of the band is really very appropriate. It's very very depressing, dark music, and what I like about it is the minimalist approach. They kind of invented this sound. Just two people, synthesizer and voice. That's more or less that's it, and a drum machine maybe. Very influential, of course, but it's a bit too out there for me and a bit too gloomy and dark and depressing and almost scary in places. Wasn't in the right mood for it, but I can see its importance. The next one is Talk Is Cheap by Keith Richards, often regarded as the best solo album by a Rolling Stone. Mick, Keith, Bill, whoever. This is often cited as the best one of the Stones solo albums, but the Stones solo albums in general have not the best reputation. It's not like with the Beatles that they have masterpieces as solo albums. It's often said that especially Mick Jagger has some subpar solo albums. I never listened to a Mick Jagger solo album before. Maybe I was influenced by the bad rap he gets, and I never listened to a Keith solo album before. So this is my first exposure to a Rolling Stones solo album. And like I said, I knew this is probably one of the better ones, and I liked it. From the same era, late 80s. It's better than any Stones album from, it's better than Undercover the Night, better than Dirty Work, and also probably slightly better than Steel Wheels. So next to Tattoo You, which was comprised of leftovers from the 70s, next to that, it's probably the best album with Rolling Stones involvement, including the Rolling Stones as a band that I had listened to yet. Would have been really a good, very good 80s Rolling Stones album. Talk Is Cheap, so that's really good. Then Cloud Cuckoo Land by the Lightning Seeds. It's either the first or second album, probably the first album. I knew the hits, All I Want and Pure, because I really like the Lightning Seeds as a singles band, so I have a greatest hits of the Lightning Seeds that I really enjoy a lot since I have it, for many years, decades even. And I have a couple of albums by the Lightning Seeds from the 90s. This is not going to be my favorite Lightning Seeds album. I think Dizzy Heights I would prefer, but it's quite good. It's quite a good album. But the highlights, the songs that I was already familiar with, All I Want and Pure, are probably, in my opinion, also the two strongest tracks on the album. So he chose the right singles. Then I never had Paul's Boutique in my collection. I think I'm aware of that album, through maybe downloads or streaming. I've heard that album before, and I always liked it. But sometimes it takes you really to buy the physical product to start to love an album that you only liked. I liked it, but now that I really have it in my hands and I can listen to it on my turntable, I really came to the conclusion that this is a brilliant masterpiece, and this is also the newest addition to the top 100 best albums of all time list. Maybe the video in my top 100 albums where I talk about this album has already been released when this is going to be released, so I don't know the release order yet. But if I already talked about this in the top 100 best albums of all time video, then be aware that this is the newest edition. So I already had my top 100 list finished weeks or months ago, but this wasn't in there. So I put that in a couple of days ago, after I have listened to it and listened to it now on like I said, physical product, and now really understanding not just that this is a great album, but that this is a milestone for hip hop, and probably maybe my favorite hip hop album of all time. Yeah, Paul's Boutique, fantastic. And the next one is an album that especially indie nerds would have in their top 100 best albums of all time. Sometimes you even see it as one of the 10 best albums of all time by those kind of more pitchfork kind of people, which I'm not. I really kind of despise the musical taste of the pitchfork universe in a way, but they're very big with that crowd. Neutral Milk Hotel, I always thought that this is one of the most overrated albums of the past 30-40 years, but still I like it. That's the reason why I now finally bought it. Also, I was familiar from downloading and then streaming with that album for many years now, again for decades now, and I never really thought that it is a big masterpiece, but I always thought it's good. And I still, now that I bought it on vinyl, I still think it's a very good album, and especially for its time when it was released, late 90s, one of the better albums of the late 90s from an American indie band, one could say. But I never understood that this should be one of the best albums of all time. I think it's very influential to bands like Arcade Fire and the Decemberists, for example, obviously. And I'm a big Of Montreal fan, and Of Montreal also come from the same circle of bands, but I much prefer Of Montreal. If this would be an Of Montreal album, this would be one of my least favorite Of Montreal albums, but it's good. It's a good album, and now finally I can say I own it. So that was that. Thank you very much for watching. Until next time. Bye-bye.